Super. All right. So, glue ear. What is it and how can I help? So, I expect if you're all working in early years settings, you will all know or have known a child or children with glue ear. But before we get started on the actual meat of it, well, let's have a quick look at the Zoom housekeeping rules. You can have your cameras on or off. I don't mind. It's the evening. Nobody really wants to be on the camera. So you're very welcome to leave it on, very welcome to leave it off. I don't mind. But please do keep yourself on mute at all times unless you're contributing to the Q&A session at the end so that we don't hear anything confidential. Um, any questions, type them into the chat box as we go, and I will have a look at them at the end and answer them then, or save them till the end, whatever. But if you're like me and you think you might forget it by the end, just ping it into the chat box. Come and go as you need. We might have children at home, pets at home. You might want a cup of tea or something stronger. Do feel free to come and go as you wish. The slides will be emailed to you. I know that Damon from the Hub already has them because for the first time in forever, I've been efficient and sent them in advance. So he will send them out to you shortly. As you may well know, and apologies if you hear this every single time, but we have to do it in case anybody is a first timer to us. This webinar is hosted by your Early Years Reach Out Early Years Stronger Practice Hub, and they consist of these lovely people, Damon, Victoria, Jess, and Lisa. And we have Damon and Lisa online with us tonight, so thank you for that. A Stronger Practice Hub is a hub that supports early year settings to improve outcomes from children in the local area. So there are 18 Stronger Practice Hubs across the UK, and our one is based at the Barn Nursery School in Grinstead Green. So this is all funded by the Department for Education as part of the Early Years COVID-19 Recovery Catch-Up. And depending upon where you are in your early years career, there's a lot that they can do for you. Don't worry about, looking at it and reading it now. You'll get this in a slide later, and it will just show you the kind of things that we can offer you as a Stronger Practice Hub. Now, what is available to everybody, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, is the Early Years Evidence Store, which is an online, where it's a website with lots and lots and lots of different facets of the early years foundation stage and all of the up-to-date evidence. So if you're new in your career and you're trying to look and see, what the current evidence is to inform your practice from the start, this is the place for you. But even if you're a more experienced practitioner and you're wondering whether you're actually doing what is backed up by current evidence, because once you've been doing a job for a long time, it's easy to fall into old habits. So it's quite useful just to check that what you're doing is still evidence-based. Go and have a look on the early evidence store and you'll find all the things that you need. It's not just speech, language, and communication, it's all the bits and bobs that are in the early years foundation stage. So go and check it out. We also offer fully funded early years professional development program, talking time, lots of different things from the Stronger Practice Hub. But if you have a look on the website and there's nothing that really feels to you like it ticks your boxes, by all means contact the Stronger Practice Hub because they do offer bespoke support. So just tell them the kind of things you're thinking and they'll put together a package for you, and it's all fully funded as part of this COVID-19 recovery. So really do make use of this while it's here, because these things probably aren't going to last forever and ever and ever. So, make use of our colleagues because they know a lot of stuff. Follow us on Instagram. There are so much information on upcoming network meetings for childminders, early years professionals, all the different conferences and training days that we do. All right, so into the thing you've all come here for tonight. Okay, so the first thing we really need to think about before we start thinking about what can go wrong with hearing is what can go right with hearing and how does it work when it's working. So here is an ear and the structure of the ear, and sound waves come in and down your ear canal here, just like this. They hit your eardrum, which is just here, and your eardrum wobbles just like the skin of a drum. Now, behind this eardrum are three tiny bones called your ossicles, and they bang together and continue this chain of sound towards this teeny weeny eardrum, the kind of second eardrum that nobody talks about. That wobbles as well. And the sound is delivered into your cochlea, which is here. Now, the cochlea is like a hollow snail shell kind of structure, which is filled with thousands of tiny hair cells. And depending on the sound you're hearing, these hair cells wobble. Okay. Now, if you were to roll out this snail shell, it would be just like a piano keyboard. And basically, your high sounds are at the sort of, I guess, the top end, and your low pitch sounds, as it says here, are in the middle. And this is why, if you become progressively deaf when you're older and you have some age-related hearing loss, that's why these high sounds tend to fall off first. Your sounds like s, sh, z, because actually those hair cells are trampled by all of your loud music and all of the loud sounds that we listen to in our youth. So once the cochlear hair cells have activated, depending on the sound you've heard, the sound is sent up your auditory nerve and to your brain. And that's when you hear, okay? That's when the brain hears those sounds and interprets them for us. So there's quite a big chain of events, really. So just a reminder, sound waves, eardrum, three little bones, second eardrum, cochlea, auditory nerve. Okay, so that's basically how it works. So I'll just get rid of all my drawings. So now my fun facts. These are your three tiny bones, and that's how tiny they are. They're the three smallest bones in your body, and that's then placed onto a 1p piece. So they are really, really tiny. And then the cochlea, the big snail shell thing that we looked at, is actually that big. So these structures we're talking about are super, super tiny. I find it absolutely fascinating. I could talk about this all day long, but I always think it's quite surprising because these diagrams, you think of them as really big structures and they're really, really not. We have three different types of hearing loss that you may see in an audiology report or a hearing loss report. And they are sensory neural, conductive, and mixed. And I'm just going to talk about what they are now. So, sensory neural hearing loss is where all of it works until you get to the cochlea. So, those hair cells that I talked about, they are either missing or damaged. So the whole chain works until you get to the inner ear. Okay. So that is nothing to do with glue ear. And that is a permanent hearing loss where you will have some audiological management like hearing aids or cochlear implants. Or you may choose to be a sign language user. Okay. A conductive hearing loss, with that one, the cochlea is absolutely fine. But it's this portion here, those first two parts of the chain where something has gone wrong. And that is your glue ear, probably. So what happens in glue ear is the tiny bones that I talked about before, they're in this little chamber that's filled with air. And what happens is every time you swallow, this tube here, called your eustachian tube, opens and shuts and redistributes the pressure between the outside and the inside of the ear. Now, in little people, that eustachian tube is still quite vulnerable and doesn't always do the job that it should well. Also, for children with Down syndrome as well, it doesn't work as well as it could. And this leads to this chamber filling up with glue or filling up with a nasty sticky substance. So these bones that should be floating and wobbling in free air, they just, schlep together and they just can't physically move. And that's what breaks the chain. That's what breaks the chain of the hearing. So they might be able to move a little bit. And the resulting factor of that is basically hearing a bit like this because the bones aren't moving well enough. Hearing like that because the bones aren't moving well enough. And that's why we need to take some action on it. So sensory neural is cochlear damage. Conductive hearing loss is likely glue. And some children do have both. So again, if you have a little child with sensory neural hearing loss, they are very likely to have what we call a conductive overlay. So a glue ear overlaying that and making it worse. Okay. But the ones that we're concentrating on tonight are the pure conductive hearing loss kiddos with a kind of textbook glue ear. And we're going to talk a bit more about that. So the medical name for glue ear is otitis media with effusion. So otitis, ear, media, middle, effusion, gunk. Okay, so a gunky middle ear, basically. So you may see OME on audiology reports. So glue ear can affect one or both of the ears. 1 in 5 preschool children will have glue ear at any one time. So if you've got 20 children in your setting, you can presuppose that 4 of them will have glue ear potentially. May not be diagnosed, but they'll probably have it. And 8 out of 10 children will experience glue ear before the age of 10. I think that's a massive statistic, massive statistic. So, it really is important that we are well informed about glue ear because a lot of children, the majority of children, are going to experience it before they're 10. And the reason it's only up to 10 is because by that point, that eustachian tube I've talked about and the anatomy of the ear has matured and it's all kind of working effectively for the majority of children. And again, as I said earlier, children with cleft palate or Down syndrome or any other kind of craniofacial abnormality are more likely to have glue ear due to their anatomy. So children with Down syndrome are usually very regularly monitored audiologically because they will have some glue ear. So how can you spot in your setting if a child has glue ear or is likely to have glue ear? What are your key factors for that? A change in behavior. Okay, so children are going to become frustrated if they could hear and then suddenly they couldn't. Becoming tired easily. So this happens because obviously it's tiring. I mean, we know what it's like listening in a challenging environment. If we're in, Costa or if we're in the pub and we're listening you know, through a difficult environment, then we get quite tired of that quite quickly. And we have all the tips and tricks of a fully formed speech and language system to overcome it. Whereas children, you remember, don't. You may see a lack of concentration because they're tiring and things are effortful. They may prefer to play alone because actually, if we play alone, then I don't need to use my hearing. Nobody's going to speak to me and nothing's going to potentially go wrong. Not responding when called when they have done before. So if a child is usually a pretty consistent responder to their name, pretty consistent responder to instructions, and all of a sudden they're not, that could be another sign. And also a reduction in speech clarity compared to their normal. So I know we're working with children who don't yet have completely clear speech. We've talked about, what we should expect for a child's intelligibility at age 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 25, 50, 75, and 100% at age 1, 2, 3, and 4, respectively. So you're looking at their normal and whether that clarity has regressed compared to their normal. And the reason for that is if a child isn't, if you can't hear yourself, you can't monitor your speech. And I've worked with deaf children for nearly 20 years now. And one of the easiest ways to know whether their cochlear implant or their hearing aids aren't working particularly well is that their clarity dips within just two or 3 days of losing that crisp sound that they're used to. So that's another really key sign. This is an audiogram, and I think this is something that we need to get, used to if we're dealing with children with glue ear, because you should be seeing these, or you should be able to request them if you feel confident enough to read them. So the audiogram works like this. Running from left to right is your pitch. So you've got your low sounds down here, going all the way up to your incredibly high pitched, nearly at the sort of only a dog would hear it kind of pitch. So the really, really high pitched sounds at the end. Imagine a piano keyboard musicians in the virtual room, okay? And here we have very, very quiet sounds like leaves falling and drops of water, all the way down to your super loud sounds like gunshots and helicopters and motorbikes. And what you will see on your audiogram is potentially a line that may look a little bit like this. That's what you're probably going to see, something like that. Okay. And the general rule is you can hear everything below the line, but nothing above it. Okay. And that's how you read an audiogram. So you can hear everything below the line. Okay. This here is called the speech banana. And it's where a lot of the most useful sounds of speech sit. And we like to see a line that sits above the speech banana. Okay. That's what we like to see as speech and language therapists, or a line that's only just tipping into the speech banana. Now, the thing with glue ear is it can be different levels. But I was saying to Damon from the hub before everybody logged on, I was out for dinner with some audiology friends on Friday night. And because this is how we roll on a Friday night, we were talking about glue ear. And basically, a glue ear, you may see a line anywhere from here. Apologies for my dreadful drawings. But actually, sometimes we can see a line around about, hang on. This is going to be a big, big reveal, and it's not anymore. But we can very often see a line here. So if we're thinking about that, you'll be having children who aren't hearing conversation. They're maybe not even hearing the Hoover when they're next to it. If they've got really, really thick glue that's really, really affecting their hearing, you could have a very, very, very deaf child in your setting. And that child is going to be frustrated. That child is not going to be hearing very much of anything in terms of speech. Now, that is the extreme, but you could have anything up to here. So glue ear should never really be written off as just one of those things. It can have a very profound effect on a child's speech and language development very, very, very quickly. I'd like to invite you to go and have a little look at this when you get the slides, and you can copy the link. It's a hearing loss simulator, and it's on a website by a company called Starkey, who make hearing aids. So it's a very reputable source, and they have a simulator simulating mild, moderate, severe, and profound hearing loss. And I think that can be really, really useful. The reason I'm not sharing it on here is because it will be coming through my speakers than through your speakers. It's better just to play it on your own speakers. So have a little play about with that, and I think you'll find it quite an eye opener. So I've talked a bit about what glue ear is. I've talked a bit about the impact of glue ear, but what can we do about it? What things can you do in your setting that are actually going to have a positive impact on the child or children in your setting who have glue ear? Some of these may sound basic and they may sound simple, and you may already have thought of them. But for every one person who's thought of them, there'll be another one who hasn't. So it is really well worth me recapping them. Preferential seating is absolutely key. If a child has a direct view of your face, they will be lip reading. Whether they know they're lip reading or not, they will be lip reading. Um, they will also be taking cues from your body language, from your facial expression, and also the sound will be coming straight to the child. So sound degrades over distance. So the further back they are, the worse a speech signal they are going to be receiving. And if they're receiving a poor speech signal from the get-go, and then that has to try and battle its way through glue, it's not going to work very well. So the closer they are, and the clearer they are to your face, the better. Now, this may mean you need to maneuver that child, and it may mean that you need to sort of assert that they come to the front with you, but it will pay absolute dividends. So that is probably the bestest thing you can do. If you have any kind of board, like a blackboard, or if you're in a setting that does have a whiteboard or anything, don't turn around to look at the whiteboard, blackboard, flip chart, whatever you're drawing. If you're holding a book up to read a story, make sure you're holding it to the side and it hasn't accidentally moved in front of you. Lip reading is absolutely key for these children. So do try not to be turning around when you're talking to them or giving them instructions. Now, this is a big one that people forget. When we take a photo of somebody, we ask them to move away from a window. And if you haven't done that experiment before, do it. Because as soon as you stand in front of the light, you turn into a silhouette. And then a child cannot see your face. And it is absolute rule 101 of deaf awareness is to make sure that when you're talking to someone, you don't stand in front of a window because they will not be able to see your face and they will not be able to take all of those useful cues. So just try and think about your positioning in the room. If you do have a big window, that's fine. You can pull the curtains while you're giving instructions or just move away to it. In an absolutely ideal world, you'd be standing in front of a relatively clear background as well, not something like this, for example, but we can't always have everything. So as long as you're not standing in front of the light, you're doing a good job. And it's one that we often don't think about. Make sure the child has your attention before speaking to them. And actually, this counts pretty much for all children. This is a technique that will work for all children. It will work for your children with speech and language and communication needs. But, you just have to make that extra effort for children with hearing issues or children with speech and language communication issues. Speak slowly and clearly, but don't shout. It doesn't help. So I spent about 8 years working in the cochlear implant team at Addenbrooke's Hospital. And, you'd see very many well-meaning people going, if you just go and sit over in reception, and lots of, lovely deaf adults were going, can you just talk to me normally, please? Just make it clear. Don't mumble, but you don't have to overdo it. So, as this sort of little meme says, thank you for shouting at me, said no deaf person ever. Again, it's something that we're all tempted to do because we think it's helpful, but it's not. Remember as well that sound travels less well outside. So ensure that you're recapping your instructions and you're paying special attention to any strategies that you can put in place outside because the sound just goes and just spreads when you're outside. So do just be careful when you're outside. There's also more, there's also different kinds of background noise like traffic noise and leaves rustling in the trees noise as well. Try not to walk around the setting while you're talking or giving instructions. It's the equivalent of turning around to face the whiteboard or hiding behind a book. A child is going to find it very difficult to track you, and it's very difficult then to get a consistent view of your face, because if you're moving from face on to side on to face on to side on to nothing at all, it's incredibly difficult for a child with a hearing loss to keep a track of what's going on. So when you're giving instructions or talking for any length of time, try just to stay still as well. Use visual cues where possible. These can be pictures, they can be books, they can be objects, they can be toy versions, real versions, anything visual to support what you are saying. Try to ensure children take turns to talk. Now, I know how difficult that's going to be, and I know that it's very often not possible. But where it's not possible, just try to recap any information or any key information to the child at a slightly, more opportune moment. Soft furnishings where possible. So, for example, imagine that you're in like a school hall, or maybe, so I run a guide unit and a rainbows unit. We're in our hall, it's big, it's empty, it echoes. And this can be a really challenging listening environment for a child with a hearing loss. Soft furnishings are incredible at absorbing and dampening down sound. We call it dampening the sound. So where a sound may echo and bounce around a bit, actually it gets dampened down by soft furnishings. Now, once again, I know that soft furnishings in early years settings do not go hand in hand beautifully. It only takes one child to, have an accident or vomit over it, and it's a complete nightmare. But there are things that you can do in your setting. If you've got, Hessian note boards, notice boards, so that you kind of keeping with the kind of color scheme of choice at the moment, but you've also got a fabric there that's going to start to dampen sound as well. Um, Curtains. Some people like to hang nice sort of billowy fabric from the ceiling if they can. Not only does that look quite nice, actually it's acoustically wonderful for children. So as much soft furnishing as you can. Again, preferably up high, simply so that it's out of harm's way. But yeah, like these fabric room dividers are really nice as well. So anything like that that can dampen down the sound, within reason, is going to be useful too. And reduce background noise. So this again is something that is a catch-all for all children with speech and language and communication needs. It's all very lovely having music on in the background in your setting. It makes a lovely, friendly setting, but it is absolutely dreadful for children acquiring speech and language, especially if they have extra communication needs or a hearing loss. So please try to ensure that TVs aren't on. There's no music playing unless it is part of the activity that you are doing, because otherwise all it's doing is competing for space in that child's listening signal. And really, we need to be maximizing the speech and the language. So how do we treat glue ear? What's the management for glue ear? So as soon as glue ear is diagnosed, and that can be tricky in itself because glue ear fluctuates. So you may have a child where you're utterly convinced that they have glue ear. They go to the audiologist and the audiologist says, no, absolutely fine. Glue ear can be tricky to catch because, as I say, you can have 2 or 3 weeks where you're absolutely clear and then 3 or 4 weeks where you're not. So if your appointment falls during a clear period, it can be really, really tricky to pinpoint. So please tell parents not to be afraid to seek re-referrals to audiology if you still have concerns after a clear hearing test. If it is diagnosed, there will be a 3-month watch and wait where they will be recalled after 3 months. If there is still glue, the child may be given a hearing aid. Now, that can be one of two types: an air conduction hearing aid or a bone conduction hearing aid. Now, the one on the left is an air conduction hearing aid. This is the one that we're all really used to. And this is basically This little hearing aid basically amplifies everything and sends it down the ear canal just bigger, bigger and louder. And what you're doing is you're just upping the force at which that comes through so that those bones are hit a little bit harder, and that's how the sound gets through. So for children with a kind of moderate glue ear, that would be the audiological management. For a child with more severe glue ear or more persistent glue ear, they might have something called a bone conduction hearing aid. Now, how that works is we actually hear in two ways. We hear mostly through the mechanism I've told you about, but actually we also hear through natural vibration of the bone of our skull. And what that also does is those vibrations directly stimulate the cochlea. So a bone conduction device actually just basically vibrates the bone in your skull based on what you're hearing. It bypasses all of this and just activates that cochlea. So that's another thing. So that's for the more persistent glue ear. And if your child is given a bone conduction hearing aid, you will probably be given some hints and tips from either an audiologist or a teacher of the deaf about how to manage that. So don't get too bogged down in it. But hearing aids is one option. The other option, which you're probably all familiar with, is grommets. And a grommet is a tiny, tiny tube which is inserted into the eardrum. And that allows that air pressure either side of the eardrum that I talked about earlier to remain even. And that chamber will then remain ventilated because the glue is all suctioned out and you kind of start from scratch again. So it's a surgical procedure done under general anaesthetic, and the actual procedure itself only takes about 10 to 20 minutes. It doesn't take very long at all. Um, as that eardrum grows with the child, the grommet will just fall out naturally. So 50% of grommets will fall out by 1 year post-op and 95% by 3 years post-op. And that's normal and we expect it. Very often one set of grommets is enough just to kickstart the process and give you a period of clear hearing. But you can have grommets inserted multiple times if you have to. Again, this is one of I love doing the size things. So grommets are so tiny. They're really, really wee, really, really small. Okay. Where can you find more information? So these I had never heard of until an old teacher of the deaf colleague of mine saw a social media post of mine saying I was doing this and sent me these. So these are called mesh guides, which I had no idea what they were. So a mesh guide, mesh stands for Mapping Educational Specialist Know-how. So it's basically for teachers, but actually there's an awful lot of information. I went down a rabbit hole with these. I did. It's super. So if you have a look, you can see there's all sorts of things about what is glue ear, what is the cause, and then you're having a look at the audiology and the effects on speech and language and behavior and listening skills and the intervention and all the evidence as well. So actually you can pick and choose on all of these different things. So if you want to take a deep dive, you read every section, but otherwise there's just lots of little bits. So I think these are really, really good. And they're all sorts of topics, all sorts of topics. So yes, they're written for teachers, but cherry pick what you need as an early years practitioner. The other one is a charity called Glue Ear Together. Now, this is basic. I had a look at this website and it's very, very good, but it's very basic level, which might be ideal for parents who are just starting to get their heads around glue ear and what it could mean. So that's an excellent website as well. And your other absolute Bible is the National Deaf Children's Society. Now, the NDCS support children with all kinds of hearing losses from, sensory, neural and conductive and mild right the way up to your profound hearing loss with your cochlear implants. And they are super. They are so, so good. They have heaps of training and heaps of resources. So please do have a look at the National Deaf Children's Society as well. You will get everything you need from them too. I think that's about it. Coming up next, I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone. A few of you have asked about selective mutism. And this is something that I have no postgraduate training in whatsoever. So I'm going to be spending the next month doing my research and upskilling myself in the latest evidence around selective mutism. So join me for that and we can all learn together. basically. So that's going to be on the 6th of November, and then your repeat is going to be on the 12th of November. So I shall be working hard for that one. Okay, so that